This video is for educational and historical purposes only. It may contain scenes some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
None of the Hail Mary troops could move until coalition air forces had crippled Iraqi command, control, and communications. After that, Saddam Hussein would be blind to any movement of troops along the front. The problem was time. The air campaign was scheduled to start on January 17th and the ground offensive on February 25th. In just over 1 month, 270,000 troops and all of their supplies and equipment had to be moved up to 250 miles and be ready to fight. Navy and Marine Corps pilots, air crews, and support personnel joined in the most powerful and successful air assault in the history of modern warfare.
Yeah, I remember the first night, January 17th, when we heard about the first airstrikes. We had just actually gone to bed that night, and one of the girls came in our tent and said, they just announced on the radio they're just attacking. So I was like, girls, get your gas masks ready. And sure enough, 5-10 minutes later, the chemical alarms go off.
From H hour on January 17th, when the air campaign began, until the end of offensive combat operations 43 days later, Navy and Marine aviators destroyed key targets and helped ensure the United States military and its coalition partners owned the skies over Iraq and Kuwait.
At that time, we also got to bear in mind that the numbers were such that they expected us to lose so many thousands of troops. We had no idea what capabilities Saddam had, and so we planned for the worst, and they were talking about every third helicopter getting knocked out of the sky, half the pilots being lost. And at the end of that, with all the chemical alarms and the fear that was present and everything going on, we had found out at the end of the day only one pilot had been lost, a Navy pilot.
Operating from 6 assault carriers, 2 large amphibious assault ships, various other amphibious ships, plus ground bases and makeshift airstrips ashore, Navy and Marine fixed and rotary wing aircraft were an integral part of the coalition air campaign. As the bombs began dropping on Baghdad, the massive movement of men and machines began. The field commanders used the shift as a practice run for the dash across the desert, moving units in order of attack.
So I was given command of 2 platoons, a tank platoon and a infantry platoon. But they had no personnel other than the mechanics that were currently just driving them from location to location. And they were volunteers from 1st Infantry Division and 4th Infantry Division. 15 guys became my tank crew. 11 Bravos showed up as combat replacements. As infantrymen, they were sent to us to crew the Bradleys, but they had never been on a Bradley in their life. So what my responsibility was to create crews, trained crews for the tanks, and to get some training for these 11 Bravos that had never been on a Bradley in their life. So that February the 11th, all of the personnel that would belong to my organization were on the ground. And that was it. So we had 2 weeks to really get all that done, because the ground war started February the 25th or 26th, if I recollect.
The movement continued 24 hours a day for more than 3 weeks. Desert roads that might normally see nothing but 4-legged traffic looked like a Los Angeles freeway. When the shift was complete, intelligence indicated that all Iraqi eyes were still looking to the southeast. The coalition had completed one of the largest and longest transfers of men and equipment in military history without alerting Saddam or his army. During the weeks prior to G-Day, Marine units, including artillery, reconnaissance, and combined armed task forces, were busy disrupting Iraqi defensive positions. Marine artillery and Army multiple launch rocket systems using Air Force airborne spotters, as well as Marine forward and aerial observers and clandestine recon teams inside enemy territory, had enormous success with artillery raids and roving gun tactics. The deadline set by President Bush for Iraq to get out of Kuwait was expiring, and now Saddam had no eyes over the battlefield with which to observe the Allied strategy. In the air, the coalition's opponents were the men and machines of the Iraqi Air Force. By the summer of 1990, the IRAF constituted the sixth largest air force in the world. The IRAF air threat was significant, mainly because the Air Force was a source of pride to Saddam, and he had therefore seen to it that it was powerfully equipped. It comprised a mixed array of aircraft capable of fighting for air supremacy, repelling ground-based assaults and attacking strategic targets. The IRAF had 8 squadrons of French-built Mirage FIEQs, equipped with modern air-to-air missiles. For attacking coalition troops, 10 IRAF air brigades were equipped with variable geometry MiG-23 BNs and Su-2022s, plus Hawker Hunters. 3 Tu-22 squadrons, a Tu-16H-6D squadron, and 2 Su-24 squadrons completed the air-to-ground contingent. The Su-24 was comparable to the F-111 and had the capability to mount devastating attacks against ground and sea targets. But the biggest threat to coalition aircraft came from 5 brigades of MiG-21, MiG-23, and MiG-25 fighters, and the highly regarded MiG-29. The MiG-25s were operated as part of a composite interceptor reconnaissance wing. These planes could fly higher and faster than the F-15 and posed a considerable threat, especially to high-value asset aircraft such as the E-2 Hawkeye and E-3 Sentry AWACS and air refueling tankers operating close to the Iraqi border. Much feared in the run-up to war, the IRAF's MiG-29 posed only a limited beyond-visual range threat to opposing aircraft. While it could employ the semi-active radar-homing AA-10 medium-range missile, its radar was not optimized for a long-range fight, and it had poor look-down, shoot-down capability. Once into the dogfight, however, the tables could turn. The MiG-29 was highly maneuverable and could fire its short-range missiles off-bore sight with the aid of a helmet-mounted monocle sight. They also featured a passive infrared search and track sensor with which to stealthily pick out targets without tipping off their electronic radar warning equipment. As the F-15CDs began their defense of the oil fields, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower entered the Red Sea. This was the first element of the most powerful carrier force ever deployed. By the time war broke out, it would include 6 carrier air wings. B-52 bombers were also deployed to Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, and air forces from other nations began to arrive in the region. These included a squadron of air defense Tornadoes from Britain's Royal Air Force, deployed alongside similar Saudi machines, a Jaguar squadron in Oman, and the initial elements of France's Rapid Reaction Force. By the end of August, large numbers of U.S. Marine FA-18 Hornets and AV-8B Harriers were in theater. And for the first time, the Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter was openly committed to the battle. The first 22 arrived on August 21st. In November, U.S. President George H.W. Bush decided to double the size of American forces deployed to the Gulf. The U.S.-led anti-Saddam coalition now had more than enough power to defend Saudi Arabia from any threat. Putting U.S. forces there was a risk. The U.S. did not have the supplies or support crews to fight effectively if pressed. While the president and his advisors bluffed about the power on the ground and the efficiency of the deployment, in reality, chaos reigned. The Middle East fell under the jurisdiction of the United States Central Command. Commander-in-Chief of CENTCOM was General H. Norman Schwarzkopf. Orders issued from Central Command were lost, ignored, or countermanded by someone down the line who thought they had a better idea. Cargo planes were filled with the wrong equipment. Commercial airlines landed at empty airfields, while soldiers stood waiting for planes that never arrived. Schwarzkopf cut through the confusion with a simple list of priorities. He wanted fighting men and tank-killing aircraft. With the AH-64 Apache helicopter and the A-10 Thunderbolt in theater, Saddam's offensive options would narrow considerably. Schwarzkopf's choice of the A-10 ruffled Air Force feathers. The A-10 was an aircraft that might well have been destined for the scrap heap had Iraq not invaded Kuwait. The Air Force openly scorned the aircraft, which is ugly and asymmetrical. Pilots call it Warthog rather than Thunderbolt. The real problem, however, is that the A-10 specializes in a mission that the Air Force would prefer not to have: close air support. As hostilities broke out in the Gulf, the Air Force was planning to mothball the entire A-10 fleet. But Schwarzkopf, concerned about the troops on the ground, needed a tank killer. Air Force appropriation priorities did not matter. The AH-64, on the other hand, is something of a pampered platform. As the Army's premier combat aircraft, it is the most coveted assignment amongst helicopter pilots. The Apache is highly maneuverable, equipped with sophisticated navigation and targeting gear, and sports a deadly array of weapons. Apaches were a prime choice for another reason. They can be packed a half dozen at a time into a C-5 cargo plane. By the end of August, the airlift was in full swing, with a plane touching down every 22 minutes. Pilots began to talk about an aluminum bridge between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. The scales finally began to shift in favor of the coalition. In fact, the coalition was now strong enough to undertake the liberation of Kuwait. A United Nations resolution gave Saddam Hussein until January 15th to get out of Kuwait. If he failed to do so, the coalition was authorized to go to war. During World War II, the Desert Fox, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, discovered an essential truth about desert war. Whoever controls the skies controls the movement of troops on the ground. Saddam Hussein was about to discover that same essential truth. In August, immediately after Iraq invaded Kuwait, Air Force General Chuck Horner sat down with a yellow pad and a pencil. In a few hours, he outlined what would become the most effective air campaign in history.
When you conduct an air campaign, you first have to define the goals that you wish to achieve. But fundamental towards any air campaign is the first job of any war, and that's seize control of the air.
The plan would be fleshed out and finalized by air planners in Riyadh, but the basics in Horner's outline did not change.
I said that it wasn't going to be that tough, you know. And I had a lot of details to go with that. But afterwards, the president drew Brent Scowcroft aside. Now, Scowcroft was a retired Air Force lieutenant general. Okay, so he, and a fighter pilot, by the way, flew F-86s. And of course, he was close to the senior Bush, and Bush drew him aside and says, "This McPeak guy, does he know what he's talking about?" Because I said, you know, we had planned the air phase. I say we. Chuck Horner and the guys actually out in the theater had done this, had planned the air phase, and we thought it would last about, the whole war would last about a month. You know, we had phased it, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And we were wrong. It lasted 43 days.
As dawn broke on January 15, 1991, Saddam had until midnight to pull his forces out of Kuwait. No one expected him to move. The world held its breath and waited. Far from withdrawing, the Iraqis moved massive reinforcements into Kuwait and dug a formidable series of fortifications all along the Kuwaiti-Saudi border. Media pundits talked knowledgeably about the Iraqi berms or sand walls, backed by anti-tank ditches and minefields. These were supported by entrenched troops and dug-in armor and artillery. Making a frontal assault would be ruinously expensive for the coalition troops. But the war did not start on the ground. The extensive Iraqi fortifications did them no good at all. On the night of January 16th, 17th, the skies of Baghdad lit up as Iraqi gunners blasted at targets they could not see. Explosions ripped through the night as American F-117A stealth fighters and BGM-109 Tomahawk cruise missiles hit with pinpoint accuracy Iraqi command and communications targets, beginning the process of cutting Saddam Hussein off from his armies. Operation Desert Shield had now become Operation Desert Storm. Tomahawk cruise missiles are essentially pilotless aircraft equipped with 1,000-pound warheads. Despite their high profile, the effectiveness of cruise missiles in the Gulf War has never been publicly established. The Department of Defense released thousands of pages of statistics about virtually every aspect of the war in the Persian Gulf. Yet about the cruise missiles, the Pentagon remained oddly silent. In its final report to Congress, the Department of Defense would say only that cruise missiles had a launch success rate of 98%. What percentage of Tomahawks hit and destroyed their targets remains classified. But there are clues that seem to indicate that cruise missiles weren't as effective as the public believes. The General Accounting Office cited one post-war analysis that suggests that half the missiles never reached their intended targets. According to two different reports, cruise missiles that struck the Iraqi Air Defense Operations Center in Baghdad left only small craters in its roof. That's why 3/4 of all the missiles used in the Gulf were launched in the first 3 days of the war, and none were fired after February 1st. Even with shortened operations, the U.S. fired more than $380 million worth of cruise missiles at Iraq. At 2:30 a.m. Saudi time, 10 stealth fighters slipped out of Saudi airspace into Iraq. Silently, their computerized navigation systems guided them through the half-hour flight to downtown Baghdad. Flying undetected over the city, a slight press of buttons on pilots' control sticks delivered laser-guided bombs to crucial targets such as early warning radar control centers, radio towers that formed the nucleus of Saddam's communications network, and the air defense headquarters. In a matter of minutes, the heart of Saddam's air defense was cut out. Stealth pilots skirted through a lethal barrage of anti-aircraft artillery from below, but they kept their bombs on target. In only 15 minutes, they guided their invisible planes above the flak and then headed for home. The opening round had gone precisely as planned.
It was definitely more exciting than I'd anticipated. They shot more bullets than I thought were ever made. It was an experience that you almost have to go through to explain. And when the shooting started, when the word came that it was time to go and do what we do best, I thought we were very well prepared, very well trained, very well practiced, and you just had to revert back to your old habit patterns, pretend the threats weren't there, and just do the job that had to be done.
The F-117 stealth fighter was developed secretly during the Carter administration. It was able to move through Iraqi airspace virtually undetected. In Baghdad, Iraqi air defense didn't know they were under attack until the first bomb landed.
Desert Storm was the first, what I would call the first modern war, and what the Army might call the last ancient war, the last war of the industrial age. It was an industrial war. That's probably a better formulation. And I thought of it as the first war of the space age.
The Black Jet showed phenomenal accuracy, delivering 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs through doorways and down ventilation holes to destroy underground bunkers. By doing so, they were gaining the upper hand in the air over the battlefield. From the outset, Central Command realized that air superiority would be essential to victory in the desert. To reach this goal, air planners formed strike packages, teams of aircraft, each with a specific role to play on a given mission. Sometimes numbering over 50 planes, strike packages have the same basic components. First are air-to-air fighters, next the Wild Weasels, whose job is to locate and knock out SAMs. These are followed by radar jammers. Behind the jammers come the strike aircraft, the punch of the packages. Bringing up the rear is another flight each of Wild Weasels and air-to-air fighters. With as much as 5 miles between each group, a single strike package covers a huge piece of sky. Persian Gulf pilots describe them as 40-mile-long gorillas. In the battle against the Iraqi Air Force, the undisputed king of the hill was the F-15C. Capable of speeds in excess of 1,500 miles an hour, and carrying both infrared and radar-guided air-to-air missiles, F-15s are fast and deadly. They're also heavy, weighing upwards of 60,000 pounds when fully loaded. In close-quarters dogfight, the F-15's weight would be a huge disadvantage. Fortunately, modern air-to-air warfare is seldom a close-quarters game. AIM-7 radar-guided missiles, one of the F-15's primary weapons, can destroy targets from 25 miles away. As the premier air-to-air fighters of Desert Storm, the F-15 did more to crush the Iraqi Air Force than any other coalition aircraft. Of 38 air-to-air kills, F-15s were responsible for 33.
We're flying the F-15Es, and essentially our mission here with the 4th Wing is to provide deep interdiction support for the ground forces. The primary targets are in the northern part of the theater, the northern Kuwaiti theater, and essentially the interdiction portion of it is to prevent those forces from being brought to bear against the forward deployed elements of the Army and the Marines, the coalition forces.
By the 10th day of Operation Desert Storm, what remained of the Iraqi Air Force had begun fleeing across the border and into Iran. Following the F-15s in strike packages were F-4Gs. Their mission, seek out and destroy any enemy installation or weapon system that uses radar. Their preferred weapon is the appropriately named HARM, or High-Speed Anti-Radiation Missile. HARMs lock onto the radar signal and simply follow it to the source. In Operation Desert Storm, the F-4G Wild Weasels were so effective that most Iraqi SAM sites simply refused to turn on their radar. As a result, radar-guided SAMs, which figured to be the biggest threat in the Iraqi air defense arsenal, accounted for only 20% of coalition casualties. The main strike force was usually comprised of F-16 Fighting Falcons. Designed as a low-level attacker, F-16s flew over 13,000 combat sorties and dropped more than 20,000 tons of bombs. However, they were not as effective as the Air Force had expected.
VMF A314 is an F-18 Hornet squadron that is presently providing close air support and deep strike support, along with anti-air warfare for both Imminent Thunder and the Persian Gulf Desert Shield operation in general.
The reasons for the disappointing performance are easy to pinpoint. First, there was a critical shortage of the targeting pods needed to use guided munitions. As a result, none of the F-16s that flew in the Gulf used laser-guided bombs. While the Weasels had effectively neutralized the Iraqi SAMs, there was little that could be done to knock out the low-tech mobile anti-aircraft artillery. The Iraqis successfully forced the F-16s to altitudes above 12,000 feet. Finally, there was Mother Nature. The F-16 was designed as a clear-weather daytime aircraft. The entire 43 days of the air war were marked by low cloud ceilings and poor visibility. The F-16 barely had a chance to show its stuff.
But the weather was a factor. We never thought it was going to be as bad. I mean, we lost a lot of sorties over there because the weather was the worst in a decade or something like that. And this was fought in January and February, so these were winter months. And so many of our sorties aborted in the air because they never found the target, couldn't get to the target.
British and Saudi Tornadoes used their JP-233 runway denial munitions against runways and taxiways. British losses were relatively high due to their low-level tactics. Starting from the first night of the war, raids were repeated every night for weeks. The effect was obvious. In spite of a sortie rate of more than 2,000 missions per day, coalition air losses were under 0.1%. British and Saudi Tornadoes used their JP-233 runway denial munitions against runways and taxiways. British losses were relatively high due to their low-level tactics. Starting from the first night of the war, raids were repeated every night for weeks. The effect was obvious. In spite of a sortie rate of more than 2,000 missions per day, coalition air losses were under 0.1%. But no aerial campaign against ground targets is ever completely effective, and the Iraqis still had about 200 modern combat aircraft. These included 2 squadrons of Soviet-supplied MiG-29 Fulcrums, one of the most agile fighters ever built. The coalition could field 350 air superiority fighters, including McDonnell Douglas F-15C Eagles, Grumman F-14 Tomcats, Panavia Tornado ADVs, and Dassault Mirage 2000s. In addition, there were more than 500 dual-purpose fighter bombers available, including General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcons and McDonnell Douglas FA-18 Hornets. The FA-18 pilot flies one of the most versatile weapons in the military. His plane can fight in the air and attack on the ground. He can defend himself and the fleet against a multitude of threats, and he can perform all these tasks in a single mission.
Fighter pilot's brain is a certain size. When he's standing here on the ground and we're just talking, you put a strap on an airplane, it shrinks down to about 50% of that. It's dark outside and a lot of things are going on. You're operating on maybe 10% of what you have. So we call it STEM power. So when you're on STEM power, you really want to be able to fall back on those things that you've always done. So it's the habit patterns that are going to keep you alive.
For an attack mission, you're going to fly some kind of ingress. It might be low level, it might be high level. And as you're coming in, you're thinking about the target that you're going to attack, and you're also looking for other enemy airplanes on your radar. And if you find some, what you want to do is try to shoot those guys down before they engage you, obviously, because that's better for you. You'll be alive, and also you'll accomplish your mission. If they engage your strike package, more than likely you'll have to jettison all the air-to-ground ordnance you have and maneuver with them till you can either get away from them or shoot their airplanes down. Your mission won't go. So you're trying to work on that, and then as you get in closer to the target, you're going to switch modes. You switch from your air-to-air mode to your air-to-ground mode, and you start looking to acquire the target visually with the, you use the systems on board the airplane to aid you, and then as you get closer, you acquire it visually, and then you actually roll in on the target from high altitude and then release your ordnance. Sometimes you get overloaded. I mean, and then you have to kind of let some of the tasks go away. You just don't do them.
Training, hardware, and even a lucky rabbit's foot isn't always enough for a supersonic jet pilot to survive combat.
I still get scared, real scared, and you get kind of a little bit on edge, but that's pretty good though. Gives you that little burst of adrenaline there that keeps you on edge and doesn't allow you to become complacent.
The coalition allies were superior to the Iraqis in numbers, control, quality, and training. Thanks to the sophisticated long-range radar and advanced command and control capabilities of the Boeing E-3 AWACS, coalition pilots knew exactly what was going on in the skies over the war zone. When Iraqi pilots tried to make a fight of it, they were knocked out of the sky, primarily by the F-15 Eagles of the U.S. Air Force. At least 130 U.S. Air Force Eagles participated in the Gulf War, together with 4 Saudi squadrons. Eagles scored 35 out of a total of 41 coalition aerial victories in the Gulf, including the only 2 non-American kills by an Eagle of the Royal Saudi Air Force's No. 13 Squadron. The result of all the attention by coalition assets, both on the ground and in the air, meant that the Iraqi Air Force played very little part in the battle, and a large portion of its most modern aircraft was flown to internment in Iran to escape destruction. Air superiority makes it much simpler to win a ground offensive. Having smashed the Iraqi air defenses on the ground and in the air, the coalition could move on to other matters. Iraq's ability to reinforce and resupply its troops became the target of a concentrated bombing campaign involving tactical fighters, all-weather strike fighters, fighter bombers, and giant B-52 bombers operating from bases in Louisiana, the United Kingdom, and the island of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Power stations, command centers, communication systems, and government buildings were struck on the first night of the war. Among the most successful of all coalition warplanes was the General Dynamics F-111F, although at the time, its performance was overshadowed by other, more glamorous machines.
Both missions were medium-altitude GBU attacks, guided bomb attacks against aircraft shelters, possibly housing Scud launchers. The first mission was successful with no doubt. The second one we had to abort for weather.
Flown by the 48th Tactical Fighter Wing, the aardvarks went everywhere, even to Baghdad, which was otherwise reserved for F-117s and cruise missiles. F-111s destroyed bridges, airfields, pumping stations, and anything that would hold still long enough to put a bomb on it. From the beginning, coalition flyers effectively neutralized the Iraqi army's ability to attack. Airstrikes on electrical and oil refining facilities reduced the flow of power by 85% and crippled Iraq's ability to resupply its army. Only hours into the air war, Saddam Hussein was left with only a single offensive option. On the second day of the war, Iraq launched 8 Scud missiles. 7 of those aimed not at coalition forces, but at Israel. Scuds landing in Tel Aviv and Haifa caused serious injuries and damage. Much like the German rockets of World War II, Scuds have no internal guidance system and are incapable of hitting any target smaller than a city. As a result, their military value is insignificant. They are a terror weapon, and the belief that Saddam Hussein had chemical warheads for his Scuds only increased that fear factor. The targeting of Israel was Saddam Hussein's attempt to fracture the coalition and, in effect, end the war. He knew that Arab states would refuse to fight side by side with the Israelis. If he could provoke a military response, the coalition would collapse. The real key to keeping Israel out of the war was a little-known air defense system that soon became one of the heroes of Desert Storm, the Patriot missile.
Our mission is to provide airspace control for friendly fighter forces and also weapons control for those same aircraft. We have the mission of intercepting any hostile targets, aircraft that are coming over the border. We also provide early warning of missile attack against specific sites in this area within our area of responsibility. We had an event this morning where missiles were launched at us from Iraq. We're still finishing up from that, people going around checking the area and make sure everything is all clear. We work together with the Patriot missile defense system, forwarding information up the chain of command on exact events of what happened.
However, the Patriot's effectiveness as a Scud buster has been wildly exaggerated. Patriots missed incoming Scuds more often than they hit them. Even a direct hit by a Patriot usually failed to destroy the incoming warhead. Instead, the Patriot merely broke the Scuds up. Saddam's missiles, inaccurate to begin with, were simply blown off their already erratic course to land in a different part of the target city. The coalition, issuing press releases with glowing reports of the Patriot's accuracy, knew this. But the Patriot hype served its purpose. The Scud was a terror weapon, and what was needed to counter it was an anti-terror weapon. The Patriot was a remarkably effective propaganda tool. It kept Israel out of the war. General Chuck Horner later described the strategy openly, saying, Who cares if they ever really intercepted a Scud? The perception was that they did. If you have an anti-terror weapon that people perceive works, then it works. Even with the Patriots in place, the Scuds kept coming. On February 25th, a Scud struck a barracks in Dhahran, killing 28 Americans. A nearby Patriot fire unit should have intercepted the incoming missile, but the crew never saw it. Designed to operate for only 8 hours at a time, many Patriot units were kept on alert 18 to 20 hours a day. Weakened batteries had caused the tracking software to malfunction, allowing the Scud to slip through and land intact. Israel pressed the coalition for a more reliable fix. Schwarzkopf ordered what became known as the Great Scud Hunt. This search for mobile Scud launchers occupied hundreds of coalition aircraft. Although aerial surveillance could easily pinpoint the location of a launch, well-trained Iraqi crews could be packed up and on the move in 10 minutes, safely hidden away long before the attackers arrived. Though coalition spokesmen hyped the success of the Great Scud Hunt, no one has ever been able to verify that a single mobile Scud launcher was destroyed. The missiles, and Saddam's ability to make them, remained virtually intact. The commander of coalition forces, General Norman Schwarzkopf, called it preparing the battlefield. He knew that neither intense diplomatic efforts nor the condemnations of the United Nations were likely to persuade Iraq to leave Kuwait. The problem would be decided by military action and by battle on the ground. For his ground offensive to work, the opposing Iraqi land forces had to be hit hard from the air. The Iraqis possessed the fourth largest army in the world. They were well equipped and dug in. They needed to be softened up. This is where air power was brought into play with devastating effect. From the start of the shooting in January 1991, Iraq's ground forces were subject to incessant attack. By the end of the month, as the interdiction campaign progressively smashed Iraq's air power, command and control networks, more and more coalition air assets were free to be turned against Iraq's troops, artillery positions, supply centers, and lines of communications, destroying their effectiveness for the land battle to come. Giant B-52 bombers unloaded thousands of tons of explosives on Iraq's best troops, the Republican Guard, which was being held back as a mobile reserve.
The EW called out the possibility of a threat. The Iraqis had gotten pretty smart and they did not turn their radar zone for any length of time. We had an explosion on the left side of the aircraft that we could tell was aft. It caused the aircraft to roll in about 10 or 15 degrees of bank. It was hard to tell because, like I said, we were in the process of doing S-turns the way it was. And when I looked out, I saw one go just off to my right side, just in front of the wing, and then a second one about, what I think about, 100 yards or so to the right of the aircraft. So the maneuvering and the jamming that the EW was doing probably saved, well, he did save us from taking at least 2 more, if not 3 more hits. I wasn't too concerned about the situation until I read the maintenance report of all the near misses and the possible damage that could have been done, and the over 65 holes that were in the airplane. When I saw that, then I wished I could have had a cold drink of some kind.
Clearly, the coalition ground offensive was coming, but without aerial reconnaissance, the Iraqis could not know when and where. The Iraqi forces could do little to interrupt the constant bombardment. Their battlefield air defense system had been reduced to limited numbers of missiles and obsolete gun systems. Although a small number of Allied aircraft were shot down or damaged, the devastation of Iraq's army was complete. When the coalition ground force moved, it moved fast. The assault burst upon the Iraqi army on March 24th. U.S. Marines, U.S. Army, Saudi, Kuwaiti, Egyptian, Syrian, and other Arab forces poured into Kuwait through engineer-blasted gaps in the Iraqi defenses. Far to the west, American airborne and air assault troops, in company with a French light armored division, were racing north through the Iraqi desert, heading for the Euphrates, with the aim of cutting off all Iraqi forces in the Kuwait theater of operations. In the center came the main punch. The U.S. Army's 7th Corps, a heavily armored 5-division force, including the British 1st Armored Division, drove along the Kuwait-Iraq border, outflanking the main defense lines and engaging the Republican Guard. Already demoralized by weeks of bombing, they gave themselves up by the thousands. Fixed-wing close air support was provided in the main by Air Force F-16s, A-10s, and Marine Corps AV-8Bs. The A-10's huge gun and powerful weapon load ripped through Iraqi artillery and armor with ease. 2 A-10s established a record at the end of the war by destroying 35 tanks in a day.
Well, the basic mission of the A-10 is close air support. Currently, until the ground war starts underway, we're doing a lot of AI missions and OCA missions targeting Scuds as well as EW sites, and we're actually doing some SAM site targeting.
It's back to the old stick and rudder flying. It's not an electric jet. It's got 2 hydraulic systems. The stick moves, the plane moves. You can feel it. You can feel the nuances in each jet. You still use the rudder in the plane when you're flying it, and it's more back to the old style flying.
The final impetus to surrender came when the close support aircraft brought the battle to a close by annihilating the massive Iraqi column fleeing from Kuwait along the Basra Road, which became known as the Highway of Death.
We try to be as professional in our job as the people in the Air Force are in theirs. But to tell you the truth, it helps my morale, I think, more than any lift we can give anybody else's morale, because to see people pulling together in such good spirit as we've seen out here today, I'm not afraid to use the word inspiring. It inspires me, I'll tell you.
In just under 100 hours, the 500,000-strong Iraqi force in Kuwait and southern Iraq was finished, and Kuwait was liberated.